And as for my other son, Leo, my father's voice boomed through the grand ballroom, laced with a pity so sharp it cut through the celebratory murmur. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words settle over the hundreds of guests. We'll always have a spot for him in the archives. At least he's good at filing papers. The line, delivered with a dismissive wave of his hand, was met with a ripple of uncomfortable laughter. It was not loud, boisterous laughter, but the quiet, cruel kind that spreads like a virus through a room of the wealthy and powerful. It was the sound of polite society confirming what I had known my entire life in the world of the Hayes family. I was nothing more than a footnote, a punchline to my own father's speech. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning shame that felt hotter than the spotlights trained on the stage. I wanted the marble floor to swallow me whole. From my table in the darkest corner of the ballroom, I could see my brother Caleb standing next to our father, Robert Hayes. Caleb didn't laugh. He simply smiled, a tight, triumphant smirk that was far more painful than any sound. It was the smile of a king watching a jester being put in his place. This was supposed to be his night after all. The event was officially billed as the Vance Innovations Succession Announcement Party, a $500 a plate affair held in one of Manhattan's most opulent hotels. Chandeliers dripping with crystal hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over a sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. For weeks, the business journals had speculated about this night. Everyone knew my grandfather, Arthur Vance, the brilliant and reclusive founder of the tech empire, had stepped down. And everyone knew my father, Robert Hayes, had been grooming his eldest son, Caleb, to take the throne. The party was merely a coronation, a public anointing of the chosen one. My father continued his speech, his voice swelling with pride as he listed Caleb's accomplishments. My son, a man who graduated with high honors from Wharton. A man who understands that in this world you either conquer or you are conquered. He gestured toward Caleb, who straightened his tie, basking in the applause. Caleb has the vision, the drive, the killer instinct that this company needs to dominate the next decade. He is everything I could have ever hoped for in a son and a successor. The applause was thunderous this time, genuine and admiring. I watched as waiters refilled champagne flutes, as industry titans nodded in approval, as my own mother, seated at the head table, dabbed a tear from her eye with a silk handkerchief. She didn't look at me. She never did in these moments. I took a slow sip of water, the glass cool against my trembling hand. I shouldn't have come. I knew what this would be. For 28 years I had lived in Caleb's shadow. He was the sun and I was the cold, distant planet no one ever bothered to look at. In our family, success was measured in stock portfolios, academic accolades, and ruthless business deals. Caleb collected these things like trophies. I collected old books on philosophy and spent my weekends volunteering at a local community center. To my father, this was not just a difference in personality, it was a moral failing. My quiet nature was weakness. My lack of interest in corporate warfare was a sign of pathetic inadequacy. And so, my father's voice cut through my thoughts, reaching its grand crescendo. It is with immense pride that I officially name Caleb Hayes as the new CEO of Vance Innovations. To him goes 90% of the controlling shares of the company. He paused, letting the sheer scale of the inheritance sink in. The room buzzed with whispers. 90% was more than anyone had expected. It was an undeniable transfer of power. He will also inherit the Manhattan penthouse, the estate in the Hamptons, and of course the keys to the company's private jet. My father beamed, placing a heavy hand on Caleb's shoulder. He has earned it. I felt a familiar hollowness spread through my chest. It wasn't about the money or the penthouse. It was about the public declaration of my worthlessness. The deliberate surgical way my father had carved me out of the family legacy, not with silence, but with a joke. He didn't just ignore me. He made sure everyone in this room knew I was to be ignored. He had taken my quiet life and painted it as a failure, holding it up for the world to see and laugh at. The conflict was not new, but the stage was bigger, the lights brighter, the humiliation more profound than ever before. He wasn't just my father. He was my judge, my jury, and my executioner, and he had just delivered his verdict in front of everyone who mattered. And the verdict was clear. I was guilty. Guilty of not being Caleb. Guilty of not being the son he wanted. In the opulent ballroom, surrounded by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of congratulations for my brother, I had never felt more alone, more invisible, or more utterly and completely defeated. The party was a celebration of my brother's future, and in the same breath, it was the funeral for any hope I ever had of being seen as anything more than the family's resident failure. My legs felt like lead as I pushed my chair back from the table. The scraping sound was barely audible over the renewed wave of applause for Caleb, but to me, it felt like a scream. My only goal was to escape, to dissolve into the city night before the suffocating weight of this room crushed me completely. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, trying to navigate the maze of tables without making eye contact with anyone. Each step was a battle. I could feel the stares, the curious glances turning into knowing smirks as people recognized me, the pathetic loser from the speech, the court jester in a $1,000 suit I didn't even own. It was a rental. I was a ghost at my own family's celebration, a specter of disappointment haunting the edges of their perfect picture. I passed by a table of my father's business associates. One of them, a man with a face like a bulldog, nudged his companion and gestured toward me with his chin. The words were a low murmur, but I heard them clearly. "That's the other one, the archive clerk." The men chuckled, a low rumbling sound of condescension. I flinched, as if struck my shoulders, hunching further as I quickened my pace toward the grand arched exit. Just a few more feet, and I would be free. I could already feel the cool night air on my skin, a baptism that would wash away the stench of this gilded cage. But I never made it. Just as I reached the threshold of the ballroom, a figure stepped into my path, blocking my escape. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 70s, with a calm, steady presence that seemed utterly out of place amidst the frantic energy of the party. He wasn't one of the tech billionaires or Wall Street sharks that filled the room. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored gray suit, and his eyes, a clear and intelligent blue, held a look of profound seriousness. He had the quiet dignity of a man who had witnessed empires rise and fall and was impressed by neither. He looked at me not with pity or scorn, but with a gaze of intense focus, as if he was seeing something no one else had bothered to look for. "Mr. Leo Hayes," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the noise of the party with effortless authority. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to. I stopped, taken aback that someone had not only acknowledged my existence, but had also used my name with such formal respect. "I was told I might find you here." I just stared at him, confused. "Do I know you?" I asked, my own voice sounding weak and unsteady to my ears. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "My name is not important. I am merely a messenger." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a thick leather portfolio. It was dark brown, almost black, made of rich, supple leather that looked ancient and expensive. It was sealed not with a clasp, but with a simple, elegant wax seal bearing a crest I didn't recognize. He held it out to me. "Mr. Arthur Vance wanted you to have this," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My grandfather's name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't seen Arthur in years, not since he had retired to a secluded estate upstate, cutting off contact with almost everyone, including my father. "My grandfather," I stammered my hand, hesitating in midair. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. He said, and I quote, "It's time for the truth to be heard." He pushed the leather portfolio firmly into my hand. The weight of it was surprising substantial. It felt heavy with secrets. Before I could ask another question, before I could even process what was happening, the man gave a slight formal bow. "My task is complete. Good evening, Mr. Hayes." And with that, he turned and blended seamlessly into the crowd, vanishing as quickly and silently as he had appeared. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, the chaotic noise of the party at my back and the quiet promise of the hallway ahead. I looked down at the portfolio in my hand. What was this? What truth? Was this some final cruel joke orchestrated by my family? My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation, but finding none. For a moment I considered dropping it, leaving it on a nearby table and just walking away, disappearing as I had originally planned. But I couldn't. The messenger's words, the gravity in his eyes, the sheer strangeness of the encounter held me rooted to the spot. "What's that, little brother, a last-minute job application?" The voice was like ice down my spine. Caleb. He had detached himself from his circle of admirers and was now sauntering toward me, a champagne flute in one hand, his face a mask of smug curiosity, his eyes so much like our father's immediately fixed on the leather portfolio. "Don't tell me you're actually going to take Dad's offer." The archives, really, Leo. I thought even you had more pride than that. He let out a short, humorless laugh, taking a sip of his champagne. He was playing to the small audience of onlookers who had noticed our interaction, enjoying his role as the magnanimous king and the benevolent older brother. I clutched the portfolio tighter, a sudden instinctual wave of protectiveness washing over me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was not for him. "It's nothing," I mumbled, trying to sidestep him. "Just some papers." But Caleb was faster. He reached out, his movements surprisingly quick, and tried to snatch the portfolio from my hand. "Let's see it, then." He sneered, his charming facade dropping to reveal the familiar bully underneath. "If it's nothing, you won't mind if I take a look." In any other moment of my life, I would have let him. I would have let go, retreated into myself, and allowed him to have his way. It was our dynamic, the one that had been beaten into me since childhood. He pushed and I yielded. He took and I gave. It was simpler that way, less painful. But not this time. Something inside me, a dormant, long-forgotten thing, snapped. Maybe it was the raw public humiliation from my father's speech. Maybe it was the messenger's solemn words. Or maybe after 28 years, something had finally broken. As Caleb's fingers closed around the leather, my own hand shot out, clamping down on his wrist with a strength that surprised us both. I didn't let go. I squeezed my knuckles white and pulled the portfolio back toward my chest, holding it like a shield. Caleb's eyes widened in genuine shock, his smirk vanishing completely. He tried to pull his wrist free, but I held fast. We stood there for a long moment, locked in a silent, static struggle. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a distant hum. In the reflection of the polished marble floor, I could see two brothers, one bathed in the golden light of success, the other emerging from a lifetime of shadows. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my feet. My gaze was level-locked directly with his. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The message was clear in my eyes, a silent declaration of war that had been brewing for nearly 3 decades. This is mine, and you can't have it. The balance of power, for the first time in our entire lives, had finally terrifyingly begun to shift. The mystery of what lay inside the portfolio was suddenly secondary to the new electrifying mystery of what I was about to become. Breaking free from Caleb's grasp felt like tearing myself out of a web I had been trapped in my entire life. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, surged through my veins, silencing the shame and replacing it with a singular, desperate instinct run. I didn't look back. I plunged into the hotel's labyrinthine corridors, my rented dress shoes slipping on the polished marble. The opulent hallway, lined with gilded mirrors and ornate sconces, stretched out before me like a golden prison. In every reflective surface, I saw a fleeting image of myself, a panicked ghost in a suit clutching a leather portfolio to my chest, as if it were a life raft. The muffled thump of the bass from the ballroom was a constant reminder of the world I was fleeing, a world where my brother was king, and I was a court jester who had forgotten his place. Then I heard it, a sound far more chilling than the laughter of the crowd. It was my father's voice, low and venomous, carrying down the hall from the direction of the ballroom entrance. "Find him!" He commanded, his voice tight with fury. "Security needs to find him. Make sure he doesn't cause a scene. Escort him out through a service exit if you have to." The words confirmed my deepest fear. I wasn't just an embarrassment to be ignored. I was a problem to be managed, a piece of trash to be quietly taken out. Paranoia became a cold hand on the back of my neck. Every corner I turned, I expected to see the stoic, square-shouldered figures of hotel security. Every distant sound, the ding of an elevator, the clatter of a room service cart, sounded like approaching footsteps. I was being hunted in my own family's castle. I needed a place to hide, a place to think, a place to open this strange, heavy portfolio that felt like it was burning a hole in my hands. I tested a door handle, locked. Another, also locked. I grew more frantic, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Further down the corridor, away from the main guest areas, I found an unmarked wooden door simpler than the others. I twisted the cold brass knob. It clicked open. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me, plunging myself into near total darkness. The air was stale thick with the smell of dust and faded celebrations. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shapes of stacked chairs, rolled up carpets, and boxes of linen napkins. It was a storage closet, a room for forgotten things. How fitting. I felt a bitter smile touch my lips. This was my natural habitat. Leaning against the rough wall, I took a deep, shuddering breath, my fingers fumbling with the leather portfolio. The only light was a thin sliver coming from under the door, barely enough to see by. My hands were trembling so violently I could hardly work the wax seal. I dug my nail under the edge and broke it. The soft crack sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silence. I pulled open the flap and slid the contents out. It wasn't just one document, but a thick stack of heavy cream-colored paper bound with a blue ribbon. On top of the stack was a single folded letter. I set the letter aside for a moment, my curiosity drawn to the official-looking document underneath. The heading was printed in stark, serious font, the last will and testament of Arthur Vance. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. My father had handled all of my grandfather's affairs. He had assured the family that the will was a simple matter, a straightforward transfer of non-corporate assets, as the company's succession plan was a separate entity. My eyes jumped from the dense blocks of legalese, searching for the names for the meaning behind this clandestine delivery. I saw my father's name, Robert Hayes, mentioned, with a small specific bequest, his father's vintage watch collection and a lifetime pension, a generous but pointedly final gift. I saw Caleb's name, but next to it were the words, "My beloved grandson, to whom I leave my personal library of first edition novels." My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It didn't make any sense. Where was the rest of it? Where was the empire? And then I saw it in a long central paragraph that had been structured to be unmissable. My own name. I had to read the sentence 3 times before the words began to register, before my brain could accept the reality of what was printed on the page. All the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, including but not limited to my entire controlling interest in Vance Innovations, all associated properties, stocks, bonds, and liquid assets I bequeathed to my grandson, Leo Hayes. The paper trembled in my hands. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the dusty shadows of the storeroom swirling around me. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to brace myself against a stack of chairs to keep from falling. It couldn't be real. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by the stress and humiliation of the night. This was a cruel, elaborate prank. Yet as my eyes scanned the final page, I saw the signatures of my grandfather's attorneys, the raised, bumpy seal of a notary public, and the undeniable, confident scrawl of Arthur Vance himself. It was real, every word of it. The entire $75 million company, the penthouses, the jets, the legacy, it was all mine. My mind, reeling from the shock, turned to the single folded letter I had set aside. With numb fingers, I unfolded it. The paper was different, softer, and the words were written not in type, but in my grandfather's familiar, elegant handwriting. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the world, and likely our family, has just finished telling you that you are a fool. It means they have celebrated your brother's ambition while mocking your quiet nature. I am writing this to tell you they are wrong." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the ink on the page. I wiped them away, desperate to read on. I have spent the last 10 years watching from a distance. I watched as your father praised Caleb for his ruthlessness, mistaking arrogance for strength. And I watched as he dismissed you for your compassion, mistaking your kindness for weakness. He could not see what I saw. Your brother learned how to win, but you, my boy, you learned how to endure. You never chased applause. You found value in things that carry no price tag, loyalty, integrity, and the quiet dignity of a job well done, even when no one is watching. That, Leo, is the foundation upon which I built my entire company. It is a foundation your father and brother have forgotten. They see Vance Innovations as a prize to be won. I see it as a legacy to be protected. I am not giving you a fortune, Leo. I am entrusting you with my life's work because I know you are the only one who will understand its true value. A sob escaped my lips, a sound of profound, heart-wrenching relief. It was a lifetime of feeling worthless and unseen erased in a single letter. He saw me. My grandfather saw me all along. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been testing me. He had been waiting. Just then, a sound from the hallway shattered the sacred silence of the moment. The crackle of a walkie-talkie followed by a man's voice, muffled but clear. "Security to head of staff. We're checking the West Wing service corridors now. No sign of him yet." Another voice responded. "Mr. Hayes is insistent. Find the boy. He wants him out of the building." They were close. I was trapped in a dusty storeroom holding a document that could shatter my family and change my life forever, and the hunters were closing in. The truth was in my hands, but my time was running out. The sound of the walkie-talkie faded as the security guards moved down another corridor, but the sense of being hunted remained a cold pressure in the dusty air of the storeroom. I was a fugitive in a world that had moments ago been my prison. Now, holding the letter from my grandfather, I realized it wasn't a prison. It was a crucible. And this letter, this single piece of paper, was the key to understanding why I had been thrown into the fire. I sank down onto a stack of folded tablecloths, the rough fabric scratching against my hands, and I read. My grandfather's words were not just ink on a page. They became a voice in the darkness, a calm and steady presence that silenced the chaos in my mind. Leo, the letter began, and the familiar name written with such purpose felt like an anchor. If you are reading this, it means the world, and likely our family, has just finished telling you that you are a fool. I am writing this to tell you they are wrong. The tears that had welled up before now fell freely, tracing silent paths through the dust on my cheeks. I read on my world, shrinking to the elegant loops and lines of his script. Your father sees only the next move. He never understood the art of the long game. But you and I, we always did, didn't we? And just like that, the dusty storeroom dissolved. I was no longer a 28-year-old man hiding from security. I was 10 years old again, sitting across a mahogany chessboard from my grandfather in his study. The room smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, a warm, safe scent that was the complete opposite of the sterile, metallic smell of my father's office. I was losing badly. My pieces were scattered, my king cornered. Caleb had beaten me in 10 moves the day before, and my father had clapped him on the back, saying, "That's my boy." Decisive. Now my own defeat felt inevitable. My hand hovered over my queen, my most powerful piece, my last hope. I was about to move her into a defensive position, a futile gesture to delay the end. "Stop!" Arthur's voice was gentle but firm. He pointed a long, wrinkled finger at the board. "You see the queen. You see her power. But you are not seeing the whole board. You are not seeing the war, only this single battle." I looked at him confused. "But if I lose her, I lose everything." I said, my voice small. He smiled a slow, kind smile that always reached his eyes. "Not always. Sometimes, Leo, the only way to win is to sacrifice your strongest piece. You give your opponent what they think they want. You let them feel victorious. And while they are busy celebrating their small win, you are repositioning your silent, forgotten pieces for the final checkmate. Never be afraid to look weak, my boy. Never be afraid to take one step back if it allows you to take 3 steps forward later." He helped me move a simple pawn instead. I lost the queen on the next turn, but 5 moves later, that same forgotten pawn cornered his king. I had won. At the time, I thought it was just a chess lesson. Now, hiding in the dark, I understood. My whole life had been a strategic retreat. I wasn't the discarded piece. I was the pawn slowly advancing across the board, underestimated and ignored until the final decisive move. My eyes returned to the letter in my hands, the ink a bit blurry through my tears. "Caleb collected trophies my grandfather wrote, but you collected lessons. Your father never understood which was more valuable." The memory that surfaced next was sharper, colder. I was 13, standing in the middle of our cavernous living room. The air was thick with tension. On the mantelpiece, propped up like a holy relic, was Caleb's latest report card, a perfect row of straight A's. My father held it as if it were made of solid gold. "This is excellence," he announced to the room. "This is the Hayes standard." Then his eyes, cold and dismissive, fell on me. I was holding the charred remains of my science fair project, a small model rocket I had spent weeks designing and building. The ignition had failed. It had sputtered, smoked, and fizzled out on the launch pad in front of the entire school. The humiliation was still a fresh, raw wound. "And what is this?" my father asked, gesturing to my project with contempt. "Another failure, Leo. Your brother is on track for the Ivy League, and you are wasting your time with toys that don't even work. When are you going to get serious about your life?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on me, returning his attention to Caleb, the victorious son. I had never felt so small. Later that evening, I was in my room surrounded by diagrams and half-empty soda cans, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong with the rocket's wiring. The door creaked open and my grandfather came in. I expected another lecture or worse, pity. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside me and simply looked at the broken rocket. He didn't tell me it was okay. He didn't offer false praise. He just asked, "So, what did you learn?" I started explaining my theories about the faulty ignition system, the miscalculated fuel ratio. He listened intently, nodding. After I finished, he put a hand on my shoulder. His touch was firm grounding. This little broken rocket, Leo, has taught you more about engineering perseverance and the nature of failure than Caleb's perfect grades ever will. Anyone can celebrate a victory. It takes character to learn from a defeat. Remember that. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is a vital part of it. He had seen my effort, not just my result. He had seen a lesson where my father had only seen a failure. I ran my thumb over the signature at the bottom of the letter, the final paragraph swimming into focus. But the moment I knew for certain, he wrote, the moment I knew I was right about you, was not in a boardroom or a classroom. It was in a hallway when you thought no one was watching. The scene materialized in my mind with perfect clarity. I was 19, a summer intern at Vance Innovations. I was invisible, a nobody, a ghost fetching coffee and making copies. Caleb, also an intern, acted like he was already the CEO. One afternoon, I saw him corner a young analyst named Sarah in the hallway. She had made a small error in a spreadsheet, a tiny decimal point mistake. Caleb was dressing her down publicly, his voice dripping with condescending rage. "Is this the level of incompetence I'm inheriting?" he demanded, loud enough for everyone in the department to hear. "My father pays you to be precise, not to be a complete idiot." Sarah stood there trembling, her face pale, trying her best not to cry as he tossed the report onto her desk. After Caleb stormed away, leaving a toxic silence in his wake, I saw her shoulders begin to shake. While others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice, I walked over. I didn't say much. I just quietly pointed to the error on the spreadsheet and said, "It's an easy fix. I've made the same mistake before." I stood with her for a few minutes while she corrected it, talking about nothing important, just giving her a moment to regain her composure. It was a small act, a simple moment of human decency. As I turned to walk away, my eyes drifted to the end of the long corridor. There, standing partially obscured by the doorway of his old office, was my grandfather. I thought he had left for the day. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at me. And for a fleeting second, his gaze held mine. Then he gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, a secret that passed between us. He had seen it all. He had seen the cruelty, and he had seen the kindness that followed. And now, sitting in the dark storeroom, I understood. It was never about the grades, the business deals, or the killer instinct. It was about character. It was about what you do when you think no one is watching. My father wanted an heir who could conquer the world. My grandfather was looking for one who would protect it. The conflict that had defined my life, the constant painful comparison to my brother, was not a judgment on my worth. It was a test. A long, quiet, painful test. And the will in my hand, the letter clutched to my chest, was the final result. I wasn't the failure of the family. I was the fail-safe. The final lines of my grandfather's letter were not a gentle encouragement. They were a thunderclap, a declaration of war with a non-negotiable deadline. "This will, my boy, is a living document, but its life is short. It will become null and void if its contents are not formally announced before the clock strikes midnight tonight. I have placed the final piece on the board, Leo. The rest of the game is yours to play. I trust you will know what to do." Midnight. My eyes darted to my watch, the faint glow of the numbers, a terrifying beacon in the gloom. 11:32. Less than 30 minutes. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me, a force far more powerful than the initial shock of the inheritance. This wasn't a gift to be opened at my leisure. It was a challenge, a ticking time bomb handed to me in a dusty closet, while my enemies celebrated their supposed victory just a few dozen yards away. The weight of the portfolio in my lap suddenly felt immense, a $75 million anchor threatening to drown me right here in the dark. For a moment, the old Leo, the one who had walked into this party just an hour ago, reasserted control. A bitter, hopeless laugh escaped my lips. Of course there was a catch. My grandfather hadn't just given me a kingdom. He had given me a test of courage so immense it seemed designed for failure. How could I, the boy who couldn't even speak up at a family dinner, possibly stand up in front of that entire room of sharks and declare myself their new king? The very thought sent a wave of nausea through me. I could picture it perfectly. My father's face contorting with rage. Caleb's mocking laughter. The hundreds of guests looking on with a mixture of pity and amusement. I would be a laughingstock, the delusional archive clerk who had a psychotic break at his brother's party. They would tear me apart. They would say I forged the documents. They would destroy me. The path of least resistance was so seductively simple. I could just stay here. I could let the minutes tick away until the clock struck 12. The will would become a worthless piece of paper, a secret I would carry for the rest of my life. I could slip out a service exit, go back to my small apartment, and tomorrow I would go back to my quiet, invisible life. No one would ever have to know. I would be safe in my anonymity. The thought was a comforting blanket, a familiar warmth in the face of a terrifying fire. For 28 years I had chosen this path, the path of silence, the path of avoidance. It was my brand, my identity. But then my grandfather's voice, not from the letter, but from my memory, echoed in the silence. Never be afraid to look weak, my boy. Never be afraid to take one step back if it allows you to take 3 steps forward later. The memories, the chess game, the broken rocket, the silent nod in the hallway, they weren't just comforting anecdotes. They were evidence. They were proof that someone somewhere had seen me not as I was, but as I could be. He hadn't just left me a fortune. He had left me a roadmap out of the prison of my own self-doubt. He had spent years showing me I had a different kind of strength, a quiet resilience forged in the shadows. And now, at the final moment, he was asking me to step into the light and use it. To walk away now wouldn't just be forfeiting the money. It would be a betrayal of the only person in my family who had ever truly believed in me. It would be admitting that my father was right all along, that I was weak, that I was a failure, that I was and always would be the dumb one. The conflict raged within me, a silent war between a lifetime of fear and a single spark of hope. The timid boy who wanted to run versus the man Arthur Vance believed in. A sharp click from the hallway decided the battle. The storeroom door swung open, flooding the space with bright, intrusive light. 2 men in dark suits stood silhouetted in the doorway. They were large, broad-shouldered, their faces impassive and professional. Hotel security. They had found me. Mr. Hayes, the taller of the two, said, his voice polite but firm, devoid of any emotion. "We've been looking for you. Your father, Mr. Robert Hayes, has requested that we escort you from the premises." He took a step into the room, his partner remaining by the door, blocking the only exit. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment of decision. The old Leo would have mumbled an apology, stood up, and allowed himself to be led away like a scolded child. He would have let the opportunity, the inheritance, his entire future be, walked out of his life through a back door. But it was my grandfather's voice that came out of my mouth. I didn't stand up immediately. I remained seated on the stack of tablecloths, a king on a pauper's throne. I looked up at the guard, not with fear, but with a calmness that felt utterly foreign and yet completely natural. I held his gaze. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady, level, and carrying an authority I had never possessed before. The guard's expression flickered with surprise. He had been expecting a meek, compliant boy. He was not prepared for this. "Sir, with all due respect, our instructions are very clear. Mr. Robert Hayes. Robert Hayes is the outgoing CEO." I interrupted, the words tasting like power on my tongue. "His instructions are no longer relevant." I slowly, deliberately rose to my feet, holding the leather portfolio in my hand. I wasn't hiding it anymore. I was displaying it. "This document," I said, tapping the rich leather, "is the last will and testament of Arthur Vance, the founder and majority shareholder of Vance Innovations. And according to this legally binding document, I am his successor. I am now the man who signs your paychecks." The two guards exchanged a look of utter confusion. Their training had prepared them for unruly guests, for drunks, for petty arguments. It had not prepared them for a corporate coup in a storage closet. The taller guard took a half step back, his professional certainty beginning to crumble. "Sir, I don't know anything about that. My orders came from the head of the company." "I understand you are just doing your job," I said. And for the first time, I felt a surge of genuine confidence. I wasn't pretending, I was becoming. "And your job is to ensure the security and stability of events in this hotel. Is that correct?" He nodded hesitantly. "Good," I continued, taking a step toward him. He didn't move to stop me. "Then you will understand that the most important event of the night is about to take place in that ballroom, and I need to be on that stage. So you are going to step aside. Then you are going to escort me back to that ballroom and ensure that no one, including Robert Hayes, interferes with me until I am finished speaking." It was not a request, it was a command. I saw the doubt warring with years of ingrained procedure in their eyes. They were looking at the same face, the same ill-fitting suit, but they were not seeing the same man they had been sent to find. They were seeing someone in charge. After a long, tense silence that stretched for an eternity, the taller guard finally broke eye contact. He looked at his partner, then back at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He reached for his earpiece. "Stand down," he said into his radio. "We have Mr. Hayes. We are escorting him to the main ballroom now. Situation is under control." He then turned to me. His entire demeanor changed. The subtle air of authority was gone, replaced by deference. "This way, sir," he said, gesturing out into the brightly lit hallway. I walked out of the darkness of the storeroom, not as a fugitive, but as a man marching toward his throne, flanked by his new royal guard. The clock was ticking. The game was on. The walk back to the ballroom was the longest and shortest journey of my life. Each step was a conscious decision, a deliberate act of defiance against the man I had been just an hour before. The two security guards who had been sent to expel me now walked with me, not as captors, but as an honor guard. The taller one, whose name I learned was Michael, walked slightly ahead, clearing a path through the service corridors, while his partner David walked behind. They didn't speak to me, but their presence was a silent, powerful affirmation of the shift that had occurred in the storeroom. They had been given an order by a man they thought was in charge, and now they were following a new one from a man who held the source of all that power in his hands. I clutched the leather portfolio to my chest, its weight a constant grounding reminder of my purpose. It was my scepter, my crown, the physical proof of my grandfather's faith. As we neared the grand double doors of the ballroom, the sounds of the party grew louder, a wave of oblivious celebration. The smooth jazz, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of 100 conversations, it all felt like it was from another lifetime. I paused for a moment at the threshold, taking a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment my grandfather had written about in his chess analogy, the moment the forgotten pawn reaches the other side of the board. I looked at Michael. He met my gaze and gave a single decisive nod. He pushed open the doors, and we walked in. The effect was instantaneous. We didn't sneak in through the back. We entered through the main doors, a trinity of purpose striding into the heart of the celebration. The sea of guests parted before us as if we were a ship cutting through water. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The light laughter died in people's throats. A ripple of confusion and curiosity spread through the room, a palpable wave of silence that moved ahead of us. They saw the two uniformed guards, their faces grim and serious, and they saw me, the family footnote, walking between them not as a prisoner, but as a man on a mission. The band, sensing the dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere, trailed off mid-song, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in their wake. My eyes were fixed on one destination, the stage. I didn't look at the shocked faces of my father's business partners. I didn't look at the bewildered expressions of distant relatives. I looked straight ahead, my path clear. But I could feel their gazes, hundreds of pairs of eyes dissecting this impossible scene. I could feel their frantic whispers starting to build a low hum of speculation. And then I saw my family. They were still on the stage, basking in the afterglow of the announcement. My mother was the first to see me, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Caleb saw me next. His self-satisfied smirk dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He looked from me to the guards and back again, his mind clearly struggling to compute what he was seeing. And then my father saw me. Robert Hayes, the titan of industry. The master of this universe stared at me as if I were an apparition. For a split second I saw confusion in his eyes, but it was quickly consumed by a hot, dark wave of fury. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of red. This was his stage, his party, his moment of ultimate triumph, and I was trespassing. He stepped forward to the edge of the stage, his body rigid with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared, his voice amplified by the microphone echoing through the silent ballroom. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Security, I gave you an order. Get him out of my sight. Get this pathetic embarrassment out of here now." This was the moment of truth. The two guards, Michael and David, stopped at the base of the small set of stairs leading to the stage. They did not move toward me. They did not lay a hand on me. Instead, they turned almost imperceptibly and positioned themselves as if to block anyone from interfering with my ascent. It was a subtle act of mutiny, a public transfer of allegiance that was more damning than any words could ever be. In that single silent gesture, they had dethroned my father. I saw the realization dawn on his face, the flicker of utter shock as he understood that his authority had vanished. I walked up the stairs, each step feeling both impossibly heavy and incredibly light. I was moving through a dream fueled by a purpose that felt bigger than myself. Caleb took a step toward me, his face a mask of aggression. "Leo, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get off this stage before you make an even bigger fool of yourself." I walked past him as if he were a statue, my eyes fixed on the lectern where my father stood and on the microphone that had been the instrument of my public humiliation. My father was momentarily speechless, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my defiance. I reached the lectern and stood before him. We were inches apart, the air crackling with a lifetime of resentment and unspoken words. "Get off my stage." He hissed, his voice a low, threatening growl meant only for me. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I felt no fear. I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. I reached past him and took the microphone from its stand. His hand shot out to stop me, but he was a fraction of a second too late. I was already turning to face the crowd. I took a moment, letting the silence stretch, letting every eye in the room fixate on me. I could feel my heart pounding, a wild drumbeat in my chest. I drew a deep breath and spoke. "Good evening, everyone." I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified to fill every corner of the vast room. "I apologize for the interruption." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I glanced at my father, whose face was a thundercloud of disbelief. It seems there has been a small but rather significant change in tonight's program. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. I then turned to the large projection screen behind the stage, which was still displaying the Vance Innovations logo in a tasteful loop. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a simple, slightly outdated model, a stark contrast to the gleaming top-of-the-line device my father used. With practiced calm, I connected it to the room's wireless projection system. A few taps and the Vance logo vanished, replaced by the scanned image of the first page of my grandfather's will. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a dense, heavy silence, the kind that feels like it has a physical weight. I could hear the collective intake of hundreds of breaths. The document on the screen was crystal clear, the formal legal language undeniable. The title, "The Last Will and Testament of Arthur Vance," was a beacon. I gave them a moment to read it, to let their eyes scan down the page past the smaller bequests to my father and my brother until they landed on the central explosive paragraph, the one that started with my name. Slowly, like the turning of a great tide, the silence began to break. It started as a few whispered gasps, then grew into a tidal wave of hushed, frantic conversations. People were leaning toward each other, pointing at the screen, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. The entire social and financial hierarchy of their world was being rewritten before their very eyes. They had come tonight to witness a coronation, and they had instead become spectators to a revolution. "It's a fake." The shriek came from Caleb. He lunged toward me, his face contorted in a desperate, panicked rage. "He's lying! My brother is a pathological liar!" He forged it. Michael, the guard, was on the stage in an instant, stepping between Caleb and me, his large frame an immovable wall. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. Caleb was practically vibrating with fury, but his words were drowned out by the rising noise of the crowd. I scanned the room, seeing the story unfold on 100 different faces. I saw investors, their expressions shifting from polite celebration to sharp, calculating assessment. I saw family friends, their mouths agape, and I saw my father. He was no longer red with rage. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide and vacant, as if he was looking at a ghost. He was a man who had built his entire identity on control, on power, on the certainty of his position. And in a single public moment, I had taken it all away. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He just stood there, utterly and completely broken, a king without a kingdom's silent witness to the public reading of his own political obituary. The truth was no longer a secret whispered in a dusty storeroom. It was a headline projected 10 feet high, and it was burning his world to the ground. Just as the chaos in the ballroom reached its peak, a new and different kind of silence began to spread from the back of the room. It was not the stunned silence that had followed my revelation, but a silence of reverence and awe. The frantic whispers died down the angry shouts from my brother caught in his throat. A single unified movement swept through the crowd as hundreds of heads turned in unison toward the grand entrance. It was as if a magnetic force had taken hold of the room, pulling everyone's attention away from the drama on the stage. My own gaze followed theirs, and my heart, which I thought could not possibly beat any faster, gave a single powerful thud against my ribs that seemed to shake my entire body. There, standing in the arched doorway, was my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He was not the frail, reclusive retiree I had pictured in my mind. He stood tall and straight, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes as sharp and clear as I remembered from my childhood. He wore a simple dark tweed jacket, a stark contrast to the sea of black tuxedos, yet he commanded the space with an effortless, almost regal authority. Beside him stood a man in a crisp suit holding a heavy leather briefcase, his expression that of a loyal and serious advisor. It was his longtime personal lawyer, a man whose presence signaled that this was not a social visit. This was official business. Arthur didn't speak. He didn't have to. His very presence was a statement, a seismic event that shifted the foundation of the entire evening. He began to walk forward, and the crowd, filled with some of the most powerful and arrogant people in the city, parted for him like the Red Sea. They stepped back, clearing a wide path, their expressions a mixture of shock, respect, and a dawning, fearful understanding. He was the founder, the creator, the ghost who had built this empire from nothing. He was the source of all the power in this room, and he had returned to his kingdom. My father saw him, and for the first time in my life, I saw true, unadulterated fear in his eyes. The mask of a powerful CEO, of a commanding patriarch, crumbled into dust, revealing the face of a son who had just been caught doing something terribly wrong. Father Robert whispered the word, a pathetic, strangled sound that was barely audible even in the profound silence. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Vermont." Arthur did not look at him. He did not acknowledge him. His gaze was fixed on the stage, and his steps were slow, deliberate, and unwavering. He walked with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned the very ground he was walking on. He reached the small staircase and ascended, his movements fluid and certain. He walked past me, and for a fleeting moment his eyes met mine. There was no grand expression, no dramatic wink. There was only a look of profound, quiet affirmation. It was the same silent nod he had given me in the hallway all those years ago, a confirmation that said, "I see you. I have always seen you." And in that single glance, a lifetime of doubt and insecurity washed away. I was no longer a boy playing a part. I was the man he had chosen. He reached the center of the stage and finally turned to face his son. He did not look at the will projected on the screen. He did not look at the stunned crowd. He looked only at Robert, and the disappointment in his eyes was a more devastating weapon than any anger could ever have been. "I gave you the privilege of stewardship," Robert Arthur said, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was the voice of a creator speaking to his flawed creation. "I entrusted you with the company I built from the dirt with my own 2 hands. I gave you the power to direct it, to guide it, to nurture it, but I never gave you ownership. The keys to the kingdom are not the same thing as the crown." Robert seemed to shrink under his father's gaze, his face pale and slack. "Father, I don't understand. I did what you taught me. I made the company stronger. Profits are up. Our stock has never been higher." A sad, weary smile touched Arthur's lips. "You increased profits by sacrificing our principles. You chased quarterly earnings and forgot about the long-term vision. You replaced craftsmen with contractors. You replaced loyalty with fear. You hollowed out the soul of this company and turned it into a gilded, empty shell, all for the sake of numbers on a spreadsheet. I gave you a legacy to protect, and you treated it like a prize to be sold to the highest bidder. This party, this obscene display of arrogance, this was never about the company. This was about you. It was about your ego." He paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. "I gave you a final test, Robert. I stepped away to see what kind of man you would become without my shadow over you, to see if you would honor the values upon which this company was founded. It was a test of your character. And you have failed. You have failed spectacularly." The finality in his voice was absolute. There was no room for argument, no possibility of appeal. It was a verdict delivered by the highest possible court. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, a man completely and utterly dismantled in front of the world he had tried so desperately to conquer. Then Arthur Vance turned to face the audience. He was no longer just a father speaking to his son. He was a leader, a visionary addressing his shareholders, his employees, and his peers. He gestured to the will on the screen behind him. "What you see on that screen is not a whim," he declared, his voice rising with a quiet passion. "It is the culmination of a decade of observation. It is a decision I made not with sentiment, but with a clear understanding of what this company needs to survive and to thrive." Vance Innovations was built on a simple idea that true lasting value comes not from ruthless ambition, but from unwavering integrity. It comes from the courage to innovate, the humility to listen, and the character to do the right thing, especially when no one is watching. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the room. "For years I have watched my two grandsons. I watched one of them chase every award, every headline, every shortcut to success. He learned how to be impressive. He learned how to win." He glanced briefly at Caleb, who was now standing by our mother, his earlier rage replaced by a stunned, childlike confusion. "But I watched my other grandson Leo learn something far more difficult and far more valuable. He learned how to be resilient. He learned how to endure ridicule with dignity. He learned the value of kindness when no one was there to reward it. He learned that character is not defined by public victories, but by private choices. The world taught him he was a failure, and in doing so it forged him into the only man in this family who is fit to lead." He turned and looked directly at me. The warmth and pride in his eyes was a physical force, a wave of validation that washed over me and settled deep in my soul. "I am not looking for an heir who knows how to conquer," Arthur announced, his voice ringing with conviction. "I am looking for one who knows how to build. I do not need a son who can mimic my success. I need a grandson who understands my purpose. That is why I have left my company, my legacy, my life's work in the hands of Leo Hayes. He is not the heir you expected, but he is the leader this company deserves." He raised his hand, a final commanding gesture. "This decision is final. It is legally binding, and it is effective immediately." He looked at his lawyer, who stepped forward and opened his briefcase. The quiet, authoritative click of the latches echoed through the vast, silent room. The last remnants of my father's and brother's power evaporated into thin air. The revolution was over. The gasps of the crowd, the frantic whispers, the look of utter devastation on my father's face. It all confirmed the same undeniable truth. The reign of Robert and Caleb Hayes was over. The king had returned not to reclaim his throne, but to place the crown on the head of the one person he knew would wear it with honor. And as I stood there bathed in the glow of the projector screen that displayed my name, I finally understood that my entire life had not been a series of failures. It had been a long, silent, and arduous apprenticeship. The great ballroom emptied out with an awkward, hurried quietness. The guests who had arrived with such high expectations now fled as if escaping the scene of a terrible accident, their hushed whispers and averted gazes leaving a trail of profound social discomfort in their wake. What remained was a ghost of a celebration. Half-empty glasses of champagne sat abandoned, their bubbles gone flat. The grand floral arrangement seemed to wilt under the weight of the oppressive silence. The only people left were the four members of a family that had, in the course of a single evening, been completely and irrevocably broken and remade. My father, Robert, had collapsed into a chair at a nearby table, his face ashen, staring into nothingness. My grandfather and his lawyer stood quietly by the edge of the stage, giving me the space I needed for this final, inevitable confrontation. Caleb approached me, his movement stiff and unnatural. The explosive rage had burned out, leaving behind the cold gray ash of utter devastation. He looked at me, his eyes hollowed out, filled with a desperate, burning incomprehension. This was a man who had never failed at anything, a man for whom the world had always bent to his will. He simply could not process a reality in which he had lost. Why, he finally asked, his voice a ragged whisper stripped of all its former arrogance. "Just tell me why. I did everything I was supposed to do. I got the perfect grades. I went to the right schools. I made the deals. I was ruthless when Father told me to be ruthless. I was everything he wanted. I was the perfect son. His voice cracked on the last word, the sound of a lifetime of certainty shattering into a million pieces. He wasn't just angry. He was a believer whose God had just been proven false. I looked at my brother, and for the first time, I didn't feel resentment or envy. I felt a profound and weary sadness for him. He had spent his entire life running a race only to discover at the finish line that he had been on the wrong track all along. "You're right, Caleb," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "You did everything he wanted." I paused, letting the weight of that simple truth settle between us. "But you never stopped to ask what our grandfather valued. You learned how to be the son our father demanded. I learned how to be the man our grandfather trusted." His face crumpled, the last vestiges of his pride falling away. He understood. He finally understood that the game he had played so perfectly was not the one that mattered. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer before I delivered the final quiet blow. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I said, my voice devoid of malice or triumph, stating it as a simple fact. The archives department will have an open position. The job my father offered me is still available. If you want a place to start over, a place to learn the company from the ground up the way our grandfather did, the offer still stands. It was the ultimate humiliation, the final perfect reversal of our fortunes. I had taken his crown, and now I was offering him my jester's cap. It was not an act of cruelty, but it was not entirely an act of kindness either. It was a choice. A chance for him to begin the long, painful process of learning the lessons he had been taught to despise humility, patience, and the value of starting from nothing. Caleb just stared at me speechless, his face a canvas of warring emotions, fury, shame, and a flicker of something that might have been desperation. My father, who had been sitting like a stone statue, finally looked up. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the full weight of his catastrophic miscalculation. He had backed the wrong son. He had worshipped the wrong values. He had lost everything. I didn't wait for an answer. There was nothing more to say. My part in this chapter of their lives was over. I turned my back on my father and my brother and walked toward my grandfather. He watched me approach, a look of quiet pride in his eyes. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "It's time to go home, Leo," he said softly. Together we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the old regime behind for the broken men who had built it. We walked out into the cool night air of the city, not toward the past, but toward the first day of a future I was finally ready to build. True worth isn't bestowed by inheritance or applause. It's forged in the silent moments of integrity when no one is watching. The world may label you based on what you have, but your character is defined by who you are when you have nothing left to lose.